Story number 1. The feeling of being watched. When I was younger, my friends and I used to spend our weekends scanning the surface of the dark web. We were pretty good with computers back then. We never really did anything or clicked on any links at the time. We mostly just looked around for fun. Fast forward a couple of years and I've been in Japan completing a work study. My friends and I graduated high school and we kind of went our separate ways. After moving overseas, I never thought I'd see any of them again. It was around 2 years ago when I went out shopping for a dress for a party and I ran into one of my old friends. For the sake of this story, I'll just call him Dan. Dan and I were pretty close in high school. In fact, it was him who suggested the Japan work study to me back before we graduated. We hung out for the day and did some catching up. It wasn't long until Dan started talking about the dark web. He stated how he still uses it and that he's been getting more adventurous lately. I told him I hadn't used it since graduating. I don't know how, but he managed to convince me to give it another try. I wasn't interested at first. Dan was really good at talking you into doing things. It was how he got me to fly all the way to Japan and how he convinced all of us to start browsing the dark web when we were in high school. When I got home that night, I turned my laptop on and downloaded all the necessary things I needed in order to safely browse the dark web. I started out as usual, just by browsing through. I didn't click on any links at first, but it wasn't as satisfying as when I was a kid. I guess it was a lot easier to feel entertained back then. Now that I was older, just browsing seemed a little boring. I decided to click on a link that seemed pretty harmless. The link sent me to a site where people were selling drugs. I had no desire to buy any of them, but it did give me a rush when I actually clicked on the link. It was at this point I noticed my webcam light flash on. I let out a gasp and put my laptop down. I hadn't pressed anything that would have turned it on. I kept my cool and simply turned it off before I continued browsing. Not a moment later, it turned on again. I wasn't sure what was going on, but I was severely freaked out at this point. I stopped what I was doing and decided to clear my laptop of everything that had anything to do with the dark web. I gave it a deep clean and shut it off. I sat there for a while, watching the webcam light. I think an hour or so went by and it hadn't turned back on, so I decided the matter was dealt with and left it. I went about my night. I ate my dinner, had a shower, and got ready for bed. I was walking around in a towel, drying my hair, and I noticed that my webcam light was on again. I froze for a moment. I had turned my laptop off completely, and something had turned it back on and turned my webcam on. I rushed forward and slammed my laptop screen down. My heart was racing, and I had no idea what to do. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I picked my laptop up and stuffed it underneath the pillow on my couch. Still, I felt like I was being watched. That was when my phone that was sitting on the table beside my laptop vibrated. My hands were shaking as I leaned down and picked it up. I opened a message from an unknown number, and it was a picture of me, standing in the middle of my living room, in my towel. Every single hair on my body stood on end, and I felt sick. My eyes shot up to the window in front of me. It was dark outside, and I couldn't see anything, but I felt like there was a pair of eyes on the other side of the glass, staring directly at me. I rushed forward and pulled the curtains closed before rushing to my door and checking that it was locked. I didn't waste any time in calling the police, and they arrived quickly. I told them what had happened and they confiscated my phone and laptop. An officer stayed outside my house for the rest of the night. They were eventually able to tell me that someone had hacked into my laptop while I was on the dark web, and they were able to find out everything about me. They found my number, my address, and even my name. As you can imagine, I didn't stay in Japan. I requested to finish my work studies back in the United States and flew back home as soon as I could. That was the last time I used the dark web. Story number 2. Gun for hire. This story took place around 4 years ago, just before my city was forced into lockdown due to COVID. I was spending a lot of time stuck inside, and I got bored pretty easily. My brother and I used to spend a lot of time browsing random websites, and every now and again we'd come across a link to the dark web. We weren't that interested in any of it. However, when we stuck inside our house during lockdown, some new urge to entertain ourselves caused us to go deeper into the dark web. We found a lot of sites trying to sell all sorts of things. Everything from weapons to drugs, and even human organs were available on there. We came across this one site where you could hire a hitman. We both had a good long laugh about that. We didn't think it was real even for a second. So, like the idiots we are, we decided to give it a try. Now, you can't purchase anything on the dark web with anything as simple as a credit card. You have to purchase some sort of cryptocurrency, like Bitcoin, and then use that. We both chipped in to afford enough Bitcoin in order to hire someone. The site described him as being an intro-level hitman, so he was a lot cheaper than the other ones. It still cost us quite a bit, but we were well off and we decided it was worth it for the entertainment. We came up with some crazy fake name for our target. We didn't think it was real, but we didn't want to risk putting anyone real in danger. So, all the details we gave them were faked in some way. The address of the target was from some fantasy book my brother read once. We were busy laughing our butts off and having the time of our lives. I suggested we give the hitman special instructions. We told them to send us a picture of the target's dead body as proof when the job was done. We really laughed at this. The job was done, and we turned off the laptop. We didn't think that it was real, but if it was, we thought it would be funny to have some wannabe hitman running around looking to kill someone who doesn't exist. Now, we made one really big mistake that day. You see, in order for them to send us a picture as proof, we decided to give them one of our numbers. Yes, I know that was probably the dumbest thing anyone could do. We were cocky at that time and too busy having the time of our lives that we didn't put much thought into it. A few days passed and we had all but forgotten about the whole thing when I received a text from an unknown number. The text read simply, "So, you think you're funny?" I didn't know what to think of it at first, so I just ignored it. I got a few more texts from the same unknown number. They each got increasingly more disturbing. They said things like, "Am I a joke to you?" And, "Who do you think you're dealing with?" It wasn't until I received a more chilling text that I decided to get my brother involved. The text read, "I'm going to find you." I showed my brother the texts, and he suggested that we reply. So, we responded with a text asking who they were and what they wanted. We didn't get a reply. I thought about calling the police, but they probably wouldn't be able to do anything about it. It was an unknown number, and he hasn't made any actual threats yet. It was getting late, so I turned my phone off and we forgot about it for the night. Somewhere around 4 in the morning, something woke me up. There was a loud banging sound outside, like car doors being slammed shut. I sat up in my bed for a while, and I saw my phone screen turn on out of the corner of my eye. I looked to see that the same unknown number was calling me. I hesitated for a moment, but I answered. I tried to hide my fear, but my voice was shaky as I spoke into the speaker. At first, I heard nothing coming through the other side. I listened closer and heard heavy breathing. I spoke again. This time my voice was more firm and angry. I asked who it was and what they wanted. There was a few moments of the same heavy breathing. Then someone answered. They said, "I found you." They hung up and almost instantly someone knocked loudly on the front door. I leaped out of my bed and accidentally dropped my phone on the floor. I started searching for it in the dark when I heard the door to my brother's room open, followed by his footsteps heading for the front door. I raced out of my room and grabbed him halfway down the hallway. He tried to yell out, but I pressed my hand against his mouth, allowing only muffled complaints to escape. I pulled him into my bedroom and hissed at him to shut up. I closed and locked my door as quietly as I could. My brother was calling me all sorts of names, but I quickly explained the call to him and how I think the person at the door is the man that's been texting me. He began helping me search for my phone. Neither one of us wanted to turn the light on, so we were both on our knees feeling around in the dark until one of us found the phone. We called the police and told them an intruder was trying to get into our home. They stayed on the line and I explained everything as we waited for the police to arrive. Of course, when they did, there was no one there. Although we don't have any proof, my brother and I are certain that the man who'd been texting me and showed up at our house that night was the hitman we hired. How he found out where we lived is still a mystery. We haven't heard from him since then, and we're not sure what made him give up. Hopefully he decided that at least he got some money out of it, and that a couple of pranksters weren't really worth his time. We're still living in the same house, and I'm terrified that one day he'll come back. Story number 3, Mystery Box. I used to run a YouTube channel. It wasn't much. I mostly unboxed things and did short reviews. The channel didn't get much traction, and it's shut down now, but I thought I should share the story of why I decided to shut it down. Only a few months after starting up the channel, I received an interesting comment on one of my videos. I usually got asked additional questions about the product I was unboxing, but this comment was different. They requested that I did a mystery box video and attached a link to a site that sold them. Now, I knew straight away that this link would take me to a dark web site, but that didn't really bother me. It was the first request I had gotten. Honestly, I was excited, and I thought this meant that my channel was growing. I visited the site and bought myself a box. I didn't really know what to expect, so I just went with the cheapest option. I did set up my small table I was using as a studio and waited for the box to arrive. Around 2 days later, I came home to find a small box waiting on my doorstep. I couldn't wait to open it. I started recording, did my whole intro thing, and took a box knife to the duct tape sealing the box closed. I kept speaking to the camera about what I was seeing inside the box, but after a while, I just went quiet. It was a small box, around the size of a desktop, and there wasn't much in it at first glance. There was a pair of red stilettos. They were in pristine condition and looked like they cost more than my phone. I thought I had scored since they were even my size. I kept going through the box. There was a small purse, the type girls use to hold their phones, and some cash during a night out. It was black with silver glitter woven into the fabric. Very fancy and not my taste at all. Right at the bottom of the box, I found a white envelope. I thought it was probably some thank you note or something from the site, since I usually found that in things I'd purchased. I picked it up and examined it. Nothing was written on the outside, so I opened it up. I found a couple of photos that had been printed out inside. When I looked through them, my stomach dropped to the floor. They were photos of a young girl. She had blonde hair and was wearing a black dress that hugged her tightly. I noticed that she was wearing the exact same red heels I found in the box and was carrying the exact same bag. The next photo was of the same girl, but she was tied to a chair and blindfolded. I felt sick and dropped the photos back into the box. I thought that this must be some kind of a prank. Then I noticed a piece of paper sticking out from inside the envelope. I pulled it out. It was a small note that read, "Check inside the bag for an extra surprise." I was already ready to throw up at this point, but my curiosity got the better of me, and I opened up the bag. A scream escaped my mouth, and I dropped the bag to the floor. There were teeth inside of it. Bloody, human teeth. I threw up, right there and then. I thought about calling the police, but I didn't want to get into trouble, and I was still trying to convince myself that this was some kind of prank. I put everything back into the box and threw it out with the garbage. I shut down my channel after that. I don't want to think about it, but sometimes I wonder if it was a joke, or if those teeth were real, and if they belonged to that girl in the photos. Story number 1. A Little Help. I'm not what you would call a gym freak. I work out often and keep myself in shape. I used to participate in a lot of sports while at school. By the time I left school, there wasn't much I could do. I wasn't the brainy kid, and I wasn't good enough at sports to get a scholarship. I decided to start patrolling the local gyms. I decided I was good enough to be a personal trainer. One of the gyms a few blocks away was impressed with my workout knowledge and technique. I got a job easily and started work straight away. Working at the gym was easy. After a while, I got a few clients of my own. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was actually good at something. That gym became my home away from home. At the time of this incident, I'd been working at the gym for a little more than 2 years, but I had never worked one night shift. We recently reopened our doors as a 24-hour gym. This buddy of mine usually clocks in around the same time that I clock out. We would chat and have a smoke or two before I head home and before he starts his night shift. He's a security guard and mostly watches the front desk at night. One night he got a call as we were talking. He sounded real frantic on the phone, and I could tell something was wrong. He came back, mumbling like he'd forgotten how to speak. I wasn't sure what was wrong, but it didn't sound good. I like to think of myself as a nice guy. I know he's got a family of 4. I also know that he doesn't make a lot during his shifts, especially if he misses one. So I offered to cover his shift for him. Most of the evening went by quickly, but around 4 in the morning, things got a little strange. There was a couple working out by the treadmills. The guy was doing all of the working out, and the girl was kind of just sitting there. She just sat on the ground nearby while he used the equipment, and whenever he moved to a new piece of equipment, he'd sort of drag her along with him. This was strange in itself, but the way the girl acted is what caught my eyes. She looked scared. She kept her head down the whole time and didn't speak or make a noise. It was the middle of summer. The air was hot and sticky, and she was wearing a thick, long-sleeved hoodie. At some point, the girl stood up and whispered something to the guy. He seemed angry with her, but eventually he took her arm and pulled her behind him as he marched towards me. They got to my desk, and the man asked me where the bathroom was. He practically slammed the girl into my desk. I saw her wince, but she stopped herself from making a sound. I gave the guy his directions and they marched off. I wanted to do something about it, but I wasn't sure what I could do. I watched intently as the guy dragged the girl in the direction of the bathrooms, and that was when I noticed something drop to the ground by the girl's feet. It was a small piece of paper crumpled up into a tiny ball. I waited until the couple had disappeared into the bathroom before rushing to pick it up. I ran back and unfolded the paper underneath the desk. I can't explain what I felt in that moment. My hands were shaking. A cold sweat ran down the back of my neck. A lump formed in my throat, and I felt like I couldn't move or breathe. Written in small, shaky handwriting were the words, "Help me." I panicked at first. I had no idea what to do. I didn't see where the note came from exactly, but there was no doubt in my mind that the girl dropped it in an effort to get my attention. I stayed as calm as I could as the couple exited the bathroom and the man went to fetch his things. He looked even angrier than when they went in. He was pulling her around roughly. She almost tripped over one of the treadmills, and he barked at her like it was her fault. They made their way towards the exit, and my brain went into overdrive. I shot up just as they walked out and shouted for them to stop. I was on the spot. My mind wasn't working properly. I stuttered for a moment. I stepped out from behind the desk, preparing myself for a fight. I was a big guy, but that didn't mean I wanted to get into a fight with some stranger. I needed to think of a way to get her away from him, and the words came out of my mind before I even knew what I was saying. I told the girl that she'd forgotten something by the treadmills. I wasn't sure what I wanted to happen. The man rolled his eyes and squeezed her arm tightly before pushing her back towards the doors. She walked through them and made her way towards the treadmills. She passed me and I glanced at the man. He looked away. He was right on the other side of the exit. I rushed forward and slammed the security bolt down across the doors, locking them shut. The man staggered. He was confused at first, but the anger in his eyes soon flared up and he rushed at the door. He yelled and banged so hard that I thought the glass doors would shatter. The girl started crying. I ran towards her and pulled her with me to the back room. I closed and locked the door before pulling out my phone and calling the police. We waited in that room for the police, and she couldn't stop thanking me. She was so grateful. She clung to my arm and held me tightly, sobbing softly the whole time and thanking me again every few minutes. I don't want to imagine what that poor girl went through, but I'm so glad that I was there that day to help her. If it was anyone else sitting at that front desk, I don't think they would have been as attentive as I was. I don't think they would have noticed her cry for help. I haven't heard from her since that night. I can only hope that she's all right. Story number 2. Gym Crush. I used to be really fit when I was in high school. I participated in a lot of sports, and I always took care of my body. The past few years have been hard for me. I had a really bad breakup, lost my job, and had to move back with my parents. Let's just say I ended up eating my feelings away and lying around all day. It's not that I was overweight, I just lost my muscle and got unfit. One day, something clicked and I decided I wanted to get back in shape. I found a gym pretty close to my parents' place and signed up. The first few days at the gym were great. I'd be lying if I didn't say that the attention from the men wasn't nice either. One day, I noticed one of the guys had followed me out of the gym. I didn't think anything of it at the time since the guy kept walking once I did reach my car, but I think that was only the start of it. After that, every day I left the gym, I found a note attached to the windscreen wipers of my car. The notes were simple compliments at first, things like, "You're beautiful," or "I like your smile." Then the notes turned into short poems like, "Your hair is as golden as the sun, and your lips are as red and sweet as a strawberry." I'll admit I didn't do anything about it at this point because it was nice. I liked the compliments. I liked the attention. I guess that's why I can't really complain about what happened next. The notes turned into gifts. He'd leave a box of chocolates or a flower on the windscreen, and honestly, it was great. Then I started finding gifts inside my car. I left the windows up and I locked my car every time I parked by the gym, but somehow he was getting the gifts inside my car. That's when I got the security guards at the gym involved. I figured this guy was breaking into my car somehow. They suggested I park my car closer to the entrance so they can keep an eye on it. I did just that. I didn't find another note or gift by my car after that. A few days passed and I was leaving the gym. It was already dark by the time I got home. The lights were off in the house, so I figured my parents were out. I grabbed the mail and headed inside. I flipped through the letters while I locked up the front door and froze. There was another note hidden in between the letters. My hands were shaking as I dropped the letters and unfolded the note. It was longer than the ones I found by my car, but there was no mistaking that handwriting. It was a really long poem. It made me sick reading it. I didn't read the whole thing because I heard something moving through the house behind me. I spotted a shadow move out of the corner of my eye. My head snapped around just in time to see the shape of a man moving through the darkness in the hallway. He went from one room into the next. I'm not sure if he noticed me, and I wasn't about to stick around and find out. I ran out the front door and down the driveway. I hopped into my car and sped away. I made sure I was a few blocks down before I called the police. The police searched my house and found the man, waiting for me in my bedroom. He had covered the floor in rose petals, lit some candles, and the whole scene was enough to make me vomit. The police told me that he tried to convince them that he was my boyfriend and that we were having a fight. Thankfully, my parents were able to back my side of the story. I figured that he had followed me home one day just like he followed me to my car. I still don't know how he got into my car or my house, and that scares me the most. I don't want to think about what he was planning on doing to me that night. Even though I blame myself for not seeing the red flag straight away, at the same time, I didn't encourage him at all. All I can say is that he's a sick man, and I'm going to be more careful from now on. Story number 3. Under the Surface. I recently started going to the gym for the pool. Where I live, it gets really cold and it snows a lot. I love swimming, but there's maybe only a month or two out of the whole year when it's actually warm enough to go for a swim. When I heard that my local gym had a heated indoor pool, I signed up in a second. I'd been going there for a few months, and I usually had the whole pool to myself. I used to think I was the only one crazy enough to go swimming when it's snowing outside. There was this one day I went to the gym, and there was someone else doing laps in the pool. I was upset at first. I sort of thought of the pool as my own private part of the gym at that point. After a while, I thought it might be nice to have some company for a change. I did my usual warm-up on the treadmill and got a little sweaty before making my way to the pool. At first, the man inside the pool was too busy doing laps to notice me. I climbed in on the other side and pretty much stuck to the far lane. I wasn't trying to avoid him. I'm just a little shy, and it takes me a while to build up enough courage to talk or even wave at someone. Anyway, I did my laps as usual, and when my legs got too tired to kick, I laid back and floated on the water's surface for a moment. I could hear the muffled splashing from the man on the other side of the pool while my ears were under the water. After a while, they stopped. I glanced up, expecting to see the man climbing out of the pool or just resting on the side, but I didn't see him at all. I lifted my head out of the water and looked around. I couldn't see the man anywhere. He wasn't in the pool or on the side, but I could still see what looked like his bag and towel on a bench by the lockers. I thought it was weird, but I didn't pay too much attention to it. He could have gone to the bathroom before I looked up. He hadn't done anything suspicious up until that point, so I didn't have anything to worry about. I lowered my head back into the pool and floated around a little longer. I didn't feel comfortable anymore. I can't explain how I felt exactly. It was like I knew someone was watching me. I lifted my head back up again and quickly scanned around the pool, but there was no one there but me. I closed my eyes and tried to relax. It didn't matter what my eyes saw, my mind was telling me that I wasn't alone. That was when I felt something brush against the small of my back. I let out a gasp as I pushed my body up and kicked out towards whatever it was that touched me. As I kicked out, something grabbed my foot. I spun round and looked below the water to see the man who'd been doing laps next to me staring up at me. He had my foot in his hands, and the creepiest wide-eyed smile I'd ever seen plastered across his face. I wiggled around until I could get my foot free of his grip. I rushed towards the closest edge and pulled myself out of the pool. I half expected to feel his hand grab my foot again, but I didn't. When I got out, I turned around to look at him. He wasn't fully under the water anymore. He lifted himself until his eyes and nose were just above the surface, as if he was peeking out at me from below the water. I grabbed my towel, wrapped it around myself, and marched out of the pool area. He kept staring at me. He didn't blink and he didn't move. His eyes just followed me as I walked around the pool. I don't know why I didn't yell at him or ask him what the hell his problem was. I just wanted to get away from him. His eyes felt like they were looking straight through me. It was the creepiest thing that has ever happened to me. I went straight to the front desk. I was still dripping water all over the place. I told the manager what happened, and he took a security guard with him to the pool, but the man was gone when they got there. I wasn't about to let that one incident ruin my love of swimming, but I haven't gone back to that pool since. I keep imagining that man waiting for me underneath the water, with his unblinking eyes. Story number 1. An Unwanted Visitor. I was a little over 25 years old when this story took place. I'd just gotten my first real job, and it seemed like everything I had planned to have happen when I left school was happening. I attended a dance school after I graduated. For the sake of remaining anonymous, I won't say what school or where it was. My only dream since I was a little girl was to become a dancer. My parents were only too happy to help me realize that dream. Not even halfway through my first year in the dance school, I was approached by some talent spotters. They liked my style and offered me a part in an upcoming show. Before I knew it, I was sponsored, I had an agent, and I was performing in shows almost every night. Anyway, this all leads up to me getting an offer I simply couldn't refuse. My agent got me the starring role in a play I adored ever since I was a child. The show was supposed to be running for 4 nights a week for a whole month. The best part was all of my expenses would be paid for, along with earning a fixed fee per show. It was a dream job that any aspiring dancer would kill for. My only hesitation was that I had to move over 2 states away from my parents and hometown, but it was an opportunity I'd be insane to pass up. I packed my things and moved to my new apartment. It was small and quaint, but I could tell that the money was spent where it mattered. There was a shared pool area, private parking, and I had my own balcony. Like I said, this was a dream job. The first few shows were great. I was 2 weeks into my month-long stay there, and I was thinking about staying in the city even after it was over. However, on my last show of the second week, I was followed home. At first, I wasn't sure. I spotted the man out of the corner of my eye as I was leaving the show. He was hiding in the dark alleyway next to the building where we held the show. He watched me as I walked down the street, and I tried not to make eye contact with him. I walked home, and the entire time I could feel eyes on the back of my neck. I swear I heard an echo of footsteps behind me, but every time I turned around, there was no one there. I practically ran the last block to my apartment and locked the door behind me. I instantly went out onto the balcony to see if anyone would try and follow me into the front of the building. Then I saw him. The exact same man that had been hiding in the dark alleyway was now standing across the street from my apartment building, staring up at me. I ran back inside and pulled the blinds closed. I'll admit, I didn't really react to it the way I should have. From the way he was dressed, I guessed that he was homeless and that he was probably just trying his luck. I figured maybe he wanted me to give him some money, so I left it alone. I stopped walking home after the shows, though. Instead, I got a lift back with one of the other dancers. She stayed in the same apartment building, but she was a few floors up from me. I forgot about the whole affair and went about my life as if it never happened. It was the Wednesday of the 4th week, and we didn't have a show to do, so I went out for the day. I had a small lunch and did a little shopping. When I got home, I was exhausted and lied down for a short nap. My bed was right next to the balcony, and it was a pretty hot day. I decided to leave the balcony door open while I slept to get some cool air flowing in. I was on the 2nd floor, so I didn't think twice about it. When I woke up from my nap, something felt strange. The bed felt heavier. I was groggy from the nap, and the heat didn't help. I slowly lifted my head up and looked around. The apartment was dark, so I guessed I'd slept a lot longer than I wanted to. I pushed myself up, but I couldn't get over that heavy feeling. It felt like something was weighing the other side of the bed down. I didn't have any pets, and I hadn't put anything on the bed when I lied down. As I sat up, I turned to look behind me. I can't explain what I felt when I laid eyes on the homeless man that had followed me home, lying in the bed beside me. His eyes were wide open and staring back at me. There was a cruel, sinister smile on his face. My heart sank to the floor. My mind stopped working, so my feet took control for me. I rushed out of my apartment, screaming my head off. I ran up the 3 flights of stairs to get to the floor where the other girl from the show was staying. I don't think I stopped screaming the entire time I ran up the stairs and pounded on her door. It was terrifying. She let me in and we locked the door and called the police, but the homeless man was gone by the time they got there. It's no surprise that I moved back in with my parents after that. I didn't even finish the last 2 shows. I always hate thinking about what happened that day because I was happy there. I could never go back, not when I know that homeless man is still out there. Story number 2. Taking out the trash. I grew up in a pretty high-class neighborhood. The lawns were all cut to perfection, the houses all looked the same, and every neighbor greeted each other with a smile and a wave, no matter how much they hated one another. My father often talked about how hard he worked and how much money he spent to make sure me and my sister lived in such a good neighborhood and didn't have to deal with the things he went through as a child. That was until the homeless people started digging through our garbage. I'm not against the homeless. I'm one of those people that believe the situation they're in isn't entirely their own doing. I'm also one for giving people second chances. My father, on the other hand, despises the homeless. In his opinion, they're lazy and entitled people who think they're owed something they didn't earn. At least, that's what he shouted at them whenever he caught them going through our garbage. I got a little upset when they went through our garbage as well. They often just ripped the bags open and threw the trash all over the ground. I would be the one to go out there with a shovel and gloves to clean it all up. My father basically waged war on the homeless people. He started staying up late or waking up early to see if he could catch them in the act. Then he'd run out there with a baseball bat and the family dog to chase them off. Our family dog at the time was a purebred pit bull, so it did the trick and the homeless guys usually went running for the hills. One day my father had to go to an early meeting, so he wouldn't be there to chase them away before they could go through our garbage. I, being the oldest, was given the task. My father woke me up around 4 a.m, gave me his bat, and told me to sit by the front door with the dog and be ready to chase the homeless people off if they did come. I was half asleep and half peering through the window beside the front door, staring down the driveway at the neat pile of garbage bags on the sidewalk in front of our house. It wasn't until the dog started growling that I shot to attention. I spotted them walking down the sidewalk and heading towards our house. I grabbed the bat and went for the door. My father would usually run out waving the bat around and shouting, but he was also twice my size and an adult. I just opened the door up, but stayed safely behind the locked gate. I called out to the guys as they were about to start digging. I asked them not to, but they just laughed and rolled their eyes at me. I began threatening them, but the high-pitched crack in my voice didn't exactly help my case. They ignored me and kept on digging. I was terrified of the homeless men for some reason, but I was afraid of my father's disappointment in me too. So I picked up the bat, grabbed my dog's leash, and unlocked the gate. I strolled about halfway down the driveway before I started threatening them again. The homeless guys stopped and stared at me. They laughed again, only this time it sounded less like amused laughter and a lot more menacing. They straightened up, forgetting the trash existed, and started strolling towards me. My dog snarled and growled lowly. I backed away, pulling on the leash and tugging the dog back to me. The one guy looked at me and then glanced back at the open gate behind me. He said something like, "Thanks for opening up for us, kid," and then began marching towards the front door. My dog leaped at the man, snapping his teeth and barking. I could barely hold the leash with one hand and had to drop the bat in order to grab hold of it with the other. The man jumped back while the other raced for the bat I just dropped. My dog jumped at him, putting himself between the man and the bat. I quickly got a better grip of the leash and snatched the bat back up. I held it high in the air and began threatening them again. My little sister and mother were asleep inside that house, and I wasn't about to let those men run around inside like they owned the place. I waved the bat and took a swing at one of them. He took a step back as my dog jumped for the other guy. Between the two of us, we managed to scare them off. The one guy kept staring at me, even as they walked away. I pulled my dog back inside and locked both the gate and the door. I think I sat by the door for a while, clutching the bat to my chest and hugging my dog. I don't like to think about it, but if my dog hadn't protected me, Who knows what those men would have done? Story number 3. Too kind. I like to think of myself as a giver. A lot of my friends tell me that I'm too kind and that I make it easy for people to take advantage of me. I don't deny that what they're saying is true. I've been taken advantage of in the past, and it seems I never learn my lesson because I keep on giving. I was raised to take care of those who can't take care of themselves. My parents did a lot of charity work, and I helped where I could. I still take part in a lot of charity runs, and I donate wherever I can. However, I always thought it was the small acts of kindness that are truly helpful to those in need. There's a small coffee shop that's just a few minutes walk away from my apartment. I usually walk down there in the morning, get a cup, and then catch a cab to work. There's this homeless man who sits on the side of the street just outside of the coffee shop, and I always make sure to give him a few bucks. Since I do it every morning, he's come to recognize me. My morning routine changed a little bit as the days went by. He'd always stand up when he saw me, and we'd have a chat before I gave him some money and went on my way. One day I actually bought him a cup of coffee and a muffin before I got into my cab. This became our routine. I'd get a cup of coffee and a muffin for the both of us, and we'd chat for a bit before I'd give him a bit of money and get into a cab to go to work. It all seemed so innocent. It was just a small act of kindness, and I really thought I was making his day. I guess the only thing I was doing was giving him a reason to take advantage of me. You might say I'm naive and maybe a bit silly when I tell you what happened next, but I just wasn't thinking straight, and I've always been one to give someone the benefit of the doubt. It was a bright, sunny morning, and I was walking down the usual sidewalk on my way to the coffee shop. I had a smile on my face and a box full of old clothes I'd brought from a charity shop in my hands. I was going to give it to the homeless man. When I turned the corner, he wasn't sitting in his usual spot. I was worried at first and began looking around for him. I got a bit of a fright when I heard him calling to me from down an alleyway beside me. I'm not entirely sure what he said to me. The whole event is a bit of a blur for me, but he managed to convince me to go down the alleyway to look at something. I put the box of clothes down and followed him away from the street. I followed him away from the sunlight and away from any prying eyes. That was when I started to feel a bit nervous. I didn't want to be rude. After all, he'd been so friendly to me, and I had no reason to suspect anything sinister was about to happen. He turned suddenly, and his hand shot out towards me. He grabbed my hand and pulled me close to him. Before I knew what was happening, he was kissing the palm of my hand and giving me all sorts of compliments. At first, the compliments were innocent, like, "You're beautiful," or "You're amazing." Then they got frightening. He started talking about my legs and how he wanted to see me out of my dress. He even said that he loved it when I looked scared. I tried to pull away, but he wouldn't let me go. His other hand shot towards me, reaching for the bottom of my skirt, and that was when I really started panicking. I slapped my free hand across his face and raised my knee towards his stomach. He doubled over and I stomped my heel down on his toe. He finally let go of my hand and I ran back towards the street. He didn't follow me. I raced to the safety of the coffee shop and stayed there until my cab arrived to take me to work. I didn't call the police or tell anyone about it. It was just one homeless man who tried to take advantage of me. Besides, I didn't see him sitting outside the coffee shop again after that. I still give to the homeless and I still help out at charity events, but I've learned my lesson about being too kind. Story number 1. The Lost Bear. This is a picture I took of an item I found in the Lost and Found box at my work. I usually don't think twice about the items we find in there, but this one came with a particularly sad story. I just thought everyone should know the truth about what happened to the owner of this lost bear. I work as a park ranger for a pretty popular section of a mountain range. The area I work in acts as a nature reserve as well as having multiple hiking trails and campsites. I love nature and I'm a pretty active person, so it's the perfect job for me. There's a part where a part of the nature reserve is situated right next to one of the more frequented trails and campsites. A high fence surrounds the whole reserve, and it basically stops people from wandering in. Sometimes the animals will work their way over the fence out of pure curiosity. This leads to a part of my job that I absolutely hate, picking up the trash that was left behind. Every morning, once the campers have packed up and left the site, I have to hike up there and make sure the place is clean. Most campers are pretty well-mannered and will clean up after themselves. Occasionally, we'd get the hiker that cares more about taking selfies than they do about nature, and they tend to leave quite a mess for us to clean up. The main reason for this is to keep the animals in the reserve safe from anything man-made that can cause them harm, like plastic or leftover sugary food. There is one part about this that I enjoy, and that's finding little lost things. Every now and again, I find something that someone didn't mean to or want to leave behind. I once found a pair of hiking boots with several names and dates carved into the soles. I also found a pair of sunglasses and a jacket with a picture of two young girls. Finding these little lost things is the highlight of my day. It's a shame that most of them get thrown into a box, never to be seen again. Still, I like to imagine the stories behind them. I like to think of whom they might belong to and how they came to be lost. One morning, during my usual cleanup of the campsite, I found another little lost thing. Hidden in the bushes close to the fence surrounding the reserve, I spotted a small, furry leg. At first I thought it was an animal, but it didn't scurry away when I got closer. As I searched the bush, I found a ragged old stuffed bear. It was cute, dirty, and smelt like mint. It looked like it had been there for a while. It was sad to think of the poor little boy or girl that was missing it. There wasn't much I could do about that, so I shrugged it off and put it in my bag. After my cleanup, I hiked back down to the main office. I emptied out the trash I'd collected and went to put the stuffed bear into the lost and found box. As I was lowering him, I noticed a white tag hanging out of the zipper down its back. I pulled the tag out and found an address written on it. My curiosity piqued, so I did a bit of research on the address and found out it led to a house only an hour away. Something impulsive inside of me couldn't wait to drive there. I felt like a superhero returning a lost toy to its owner. I couldn't help myself. I put the bear in my bag and waited till my lunch break to drive down there. I won't bore you with too much detail. It was an uninteresting drive, and all I could think about was making someone's child happy by returning their lost toy. Those were the only thoughts going through my mind as I pulled into the driveway and knocked at the door. As I scanned the house's front yard, I didn't notice any signs that there was actually a kid living there. There were no toys, and the grass was overgrown and filled with thorns. The door opened, and the person on the other side looked like they hadn't slept in ages. Her hair was messy, she was still wearing her dressing gown, and there was a lit cigarette hanging from the corner of her mouth. I was already regretting my decision, but I took the time to drive there, so I fetched the bear out of my bag. I started explaining how I found and where I found it. Before I could get all of the information out, the woman took one look at the bear and burst into tears. I was stunned and confused, so I just stood there with my mouth hanging open and holding the stuffed bear out to her. Her tears quickly turned into anger, and she screamed at me to get the hell away from her before slamming the door in my face. I stood there for a moment longer, still confused as to what just happened. I retreated to my car and drove back to the park before my lunch break was over. Now, curiosity got the better of me again. I wanted to understand that woman's reaction. So, I did a little more research, and the information I came across will haunt me to the end of my days. I scanned through news reports as far back as 5 years ago, long before I started working at the park, and before they had the fence separating the nature reserve from the hiking trails and campsites. That day, I learned why they built the fence. There was a young boy hiking on the trail with his mother and father, and they decided to set up camp at the campsite where I found the bear. The news report went on to say how the family forgot to clear up their food before they went to sleep for the night, and the smell attracted a bear that dragged their little boy out into the forest. Rescuers searched the forest for months, but they never found the boy. The fence was built and new rules were put into place for both hikers and campers about clearing up campsites and keeping demarked trails away from the reserve. While reading the news report, I found a photo of the young boy that was taken by the bear, and my heart sank into the pit of my stomach. In the photo, he was holding the same bear that I found. He was only 7 years old. Story number 2. The show must go on. This picture is of something that I stole from the lost and found box at my school. I couldn't help myself. I regret stealing these ballet shoes now, especially after I found out that the rumor about the girl who used to own them is true. I used to have to take the bus to school in the mornings because both of my parents worked night jobs and slept in most of the time. I hated the bus. It was gross, and the creepy driver always tried to grab my butt when I climbed on and off. Thankfully, I convinced my parents to get me a bike one Christmas, and I ended up taking that to school instead. I'm telling you this because the fact that I biked to school every morning explains why one morning, in the middle of one of the worst storms we ever had, I ended up in the principal's office looking through the lost and found for some spare clothes. It hadn't started raining till I was halfway to school, and by that point it was too late. The storm hit us fast, and it hit us hard. I was drenched in seconds. I couldn't march around the school all day in soaked clothes. Unfortunately, the storm had flooded us in and cut out the power. That's why the principal ended up leaving me to go through the lost and found all by myself. That's when I found them, pretty pink ballet shoes hidden right at the bottom of the pile. I'm not the type of girl you'd find in a ballet class twirling and dancing on my toes, but I was interested in it when I was younger. When I turned them around, I saw the name Emma written on the back. I didn't know any Emma at the school. I guess that's why I took them. They looked really old and worn, so I didn't think anyone was still looking for them. Not long after I found some spare clothes to change into, the teachers had all the students gather in the school's gym. It was dark and we were each given a candle and told to sit in groups. You can probably guess what we decided to do next. We were bored, it was dark, and the rumbling thunder and rain banging on the roof made the atmosphere excellent for telling scary stories. One kid I knew from middle school grabbed the candle and pulled it close to his chin until his face was glowing menacingly. I didn't pay much attention to his story at first, until he mentioned a pair of ballet shoes. He spoke about a rumor of a girl who went to our school. She was a ballet dancer and she used to perform in shows in the very gym we were sitting in. According to the story, she had a rival. She was the best dancer in her class and she always got the best roles in their shows. One of the girls she danced with didn't like that. It was on the night of one of her biggest shows that she disappeared. It was supposed to be an interpretation of Swan Lake, and she was meant to play the role of the swan. When it came time for the show to start, no one could find her. The girl who hated her the most stepped forward and took her place. It wasn't until after the show that they found her. Her body had been stuffed into a trunk backstage. They said she'd been dead for hours. They didn't know who killed her for sure, but everyone suspected the girl who always wanted to take her place in the show. The only thing they never found were her ballet shoes. I didn't believe the story. After all, it just sounded like a silly ghost story, but then I decided to poke at it a little. The ballet shoes I stole from Lost and Found were burning a hole in my school bag. I asked the guy telling the story what the girl's name was. He said her name was Emma. Story number 3. A picture is worth 1,000 words. This is a picture of a wallet I found while clearing out the old Lost and Found box in a museum where I work. Usually when wallets go missing, they don't stay missing unless they're stolen. I guess that's why I was so interested in it. Knowing what I know now, I wish I had just thrown it out with the rest of the stuff. You'd be surprised how many things go missing at a museum. Jackets, shoes, sunglasses, lunchboxes, and even socks all end up in the Lost and Found box. I'm sort of a day manager for the museum. The people higher up make us clear out the Lost and Found every few months so it doesn't get too cluttered. That's not my job usually, but the guy who was supposed to do it never showed up for his shift, so I got stuck with the job. It was grubby work at first, but I made a game out of it and it got pretty fun after that. I started making up stories about each object and why they were lost. They were silly stories like, this pair of shoes used to belong to a supervillain, but he got caught by the superhero who steals shoes. I don't have much of an imagination. Anyway, I got to the bottom of one pile and found an old wallet. It was leather-bound and it looked pretty expensive. Now, when people lose their wallets, they tend to go looking for them, so finding a wallet in the Lost and Found was a rarity. I searched through it and someone had already taken all of the money out, unsurprisingly. However, the ID of the owner was still inside of it. I found that even stranger. You can find out a lot about someone these days by just searching their name on the internet, so the fact that this guy's ID was still in his wallet and it hadn't been returned to him yet was amazing. After making up stories about superheroes stealing shoes all day, I guess I wanted to think of myself as a bit of a hero as well. I dropped everything I was doing, since it wasn't actually my job anyway, and went to do some research on the owner of the wallet. You can't just search someone's name. There are usually a few people who share the same name in an area. I searched the name on the ID along with the city it was issued in, and I got over 20 results. So I dug a little deeper. I went through the wallet and scanned every single item in there. I found a business card with the name and address of a printing company on it, and that helped me narrow it down a little bit more. I typed the name on the ID in, along with the name and address of the printing company. The first result I got shocked me to my core. My blood turned cold, and for a moment I had forgotten how to breathe. What I got was a news report about a massacre that occurred only a year ago in a printing company. An employee of 5 years went crazy. He found out his wife had been sleeping with his boss, so he killed him. He then went on a rampage and killed almost 30 people in the building before police eventually gunned him down. I never heard of this, and yet all of my search results were stories about it. The man who they gunned down was born in my hometown. He was only 2 years older than me. Worst of all, the picture I found of him matched the picture on the ID I was holding in my hands. I dropped the wallet and spat on it, almost as if I'd been holding the soul of the devil. It wasn't a surprise that no one had come looking for the wallet. I felt sick to my stomach when I realized that I'd been going through the year-old box when I found the wallet, which means he lost it just before he killed all of those people.